My life was about to change forever. My name is Evelyn Parker, and at 72, I carry the kind of stories no one believes until they see the ending. That morning I was wearing my good Sunday dress, the one I saved for church and special occasions. I never imagined it would also be the outfit I wore as my own child locked me out of his house like I was nothing more than a burden. David, my only son, stood beside his wife Melissa. They were in their 30s then, still sharp and ambitious, still convinced the world owed them comfort. Melissa crossed her arms, her expression as cold as the October air. She told me I was confusing the children, that I was too set in my ways, that their house was not big enough for 3 generations. David never defended me. He lowered his eyes and mumbled words about stress and responsibility, but he still carried my bags outside. 20 minutes later, my entire life was packed into 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. 60 years of memories reduced to whatever I could lift with my own hands. As the taxi pulled away and the first drops of rain touched the window, I promised myself I would not look back. Not because I was strong, but because I was too broken to face what I had lost. At that moment I had no idea that humiliation would become the seed of the greatest transformation of my life. I did not know I would rise from those motel nights with only $800 to my name and turn it into a business worth millions. All I knew then was that family had cast me aside. What they called garbage, life would later prove to be gold. The Sunset Motel on the edge of Route 7 became my shelter, though calling it home would have been generous. The neon sign buzzed all night. The carpet carried stains older than I was, and the air conditioner rattled like it was struggling to breathe. $45 a night bought me 4 walls, a flickering lamp, and a bed that sagged in the middle. Still, after being thrown out by my own son, even that felt like a luxury. A door that locked was a small but powerful comfort when you had nowhere else to turn. The manager, Mr. Howard, was a man in his late 60s with thinning white hair and eyes that carried more kindness than he ever admitted out loud. After my first week, he slid an extra towel across the counter. "You're not like our usual guests," he said softly. "Most people checked in with secrets or debts chasing them. I had nothing chasing me except silence from the people I loved most. That silence hurt worse than any bill collector ever could." Mornings were the hardest. I woke each day forgetting where I was, until the smell of bleach and the sound of distant traffic reminded me. There were no children's voices, no laughter, no one asking if I wanted coffee. Just me and the cracked ceiling above my head. Some mornings I cried quietly into the thin motel pillow, embarrassed at how small I had become. Other mornings I forced myself to dress neatly, to remind myself that dignity was the one thing I still owned. I stretched every dollar like it was my last. A box of instant oatmeal and a jar of peanut butter kept me fed. I sold a few pieces of jewelry, not for much but enough to buy bus fare to the library. That library became my refuge. Free air conditioning, free internet, and the illusion of belonging among other people who were searching for something. I scanned job listings endlessly, though every rejection reminded me that 60 was not an age employers celebrated. Still, I refused to let bitterness take root. I told myself that if I had survived raising David alone after his father left, I could survive this too. I did not know it yet, but the cracks in that motel room were where the light would eventually enter. Broken places have a way of teaching you strength you never wanted to learn. By the 3rd week at the motel, I knew I had to find work or risk losing even the little roof I had. Every morning I dressed in the one blazer I had left, polished my shoes until the leather looked almost respectable, and walked from one business to the next with my resume folded neatly in a manila envelope. Some managers didn't even glance at me before shaking their heads. Others looked at my age and offered polite excuses about different directions or more current experience. Each rejection added weight to the loneliness already pressing on my chest. Still, I kept walking. And then one afternoon I found myself in front of a small garden center with a sign that read Thompson's Greenhouse. The smell of damp soil and fresh herbs spilled out as I stepped through the door. Behind the counter was a woman about my age, her hands covered in earth, her eyes sharp but not unkind. "Looking for something?" she asked. Her name was Linda Thompson, the owner. I told her I was searching for work, any work, even if it was sweeping floors. She studied me for a moment before asking about my background. I told her about managing the finances for my late husband's small contracting business, about keeping the books balanced when money was always tight. Numbers were my language, and organization was my strength. Linda tilted her head, almost skeptical, then led me to her cluttered office. Within 10 minutes I could see 3 ways she was losing money. overpaying suppliers, tracking inventory on paper scraps, and using outdated prices. I mentioned it gently, not wanting to sound critical. Her eyes widened just a little. "You have experience in bookkeeping?" she asked. 20 years, I said, though in truth it felt like a lifetime. She warned me the pay wasn't much, $15 an hour part-time. I nearly cried with relief. That first paycheck came to $240, and I treated it like winning the lottery. I bought a second-hand coffee maker, hung up the few family photos I still carried, and for the first time in weeks I felt like a person again. It wasn't a fortune, but it was dignity. And sometimes dignity is the seed from which hope grows. It was during those early months at Thompson's greenhouse that I stumbled upon the spark that would change everything. One chilly November afternoon, I followed Linda out back as she supervised workers loading a truck with wilted plants. Dozens of pots filled with drooping leaves and brittle stems were being stacked like trash. "End of season clearance," she explained with a sigh. "These are unsellable. We toss them every year." To her, they were waste. To me, they looked like a second chance waiting to happen. I asked if I could take a few home. She laughed, certain I would only clutter my tiny apartment. "They're dead," she told me flatly. But I didn't see death. I saw dormancy, neglect, and possibility. Linda finally shrugged. "Take as many as you like, but don't say I didn't warn you." That evening I carried armfuls of pots up the narrow stairs to my studio above the pizza shop. Soon every surface, window ledges, countertops, even the floor near my bed was filled with struggling plants. Neighbors whispered that I was odd, maybe even running some kind of strange business. Mrs. Chen from downstairs muttered, "Too many plants," every time she caught me with another pot. I ignored them. Night after night I researched plant care at the library, scribbling notes from gardening manuals and watching free online tutorials. I trimmed brown leaves, adjusted soil, watered carefully, and whispered encouragement as though the plants could hear me. In January, when snow blanketed the streets outside, I noticed tiny green shoots pushing through soil in pots that had looked hopeless. By February, buds appeared. By March, the apartment glowed with life. Out of nearly 200 plants, more than 3/4 were thriving. The air itself seemed fresher, filled with the scent of new growth. I returned to Thompson's greenhouse carrying the first batch. Linda's eyes widened. "These look better than when I bought them," she gasped. I grinned, hiding the swell of pride. She bought every one back at half the original price, handing me $847 in cash. In that moment I realized I wasn't just saving plants, I was saving myself. What others saw as worthless I could see as potential. What others discarded, I could nurture into value again. Those plants were more than merchandise, they were proof that being thrown away does not mean the end. Sometimes it is only the beginning. From that single experiment, my life began to take on a rhythm I had not felt in years. Word spread quickly through town that the older woman above the pizza shop could bring nearly any plant back to life. Customers who had once passed me by now stopped to ask questions. Other garden centers heard rumors and called Linda to ask if I might take their unsold plants too. What started as a side project in my tiny studio was becoming something larger, something that carried both purpose and profit. By the second year, my evenings were no longer quiet. Pots lined the balcony, bags of soil stacked in the hallway, and the scent of lavender and basil drifted down to the pizzeria below. Joseph, the owner, joked that my jungle attracted more business than his pepperoni special. "You make this place smell alive," he told me, smiling as he carried extra boxes upstairs so I could use them for plant trays. Even the neighbors who once whispered about my obsession began asking if they could buy a plant or two. Every spring I returned dozens of revived plants to Linda, each batch stronger and more vibrant than before. She paid me fairly, but more importantly, she respected me. She began to rely on me, and that recognition filled a wound my own family had left gaping. I was not invisible. I was not a burden. I was someone who created value where others saw none. As demand grew, I faced a new problem: space. My studio overflowed, and Joseph's parking lot slowly transformed into an impromptu greenhouse. Customers wandering in for pizza often left with a fern or hydrangea balanced under their arm. By year 3, I had saved nearly $15,000 more money than I thought I could manage after losing everything. With Linda's encouragement, I registered a small business license under the name Second Bloom Plant Recovery. The name felt right. It spoke not only of the plants but of myself, a woman beginning a second bloom in the late season of life. I worked endlessly, my hands cracked from soil and fertilizer, but every ache was matched by joy. When I signed my first independent contract with a garden center 2 towns away, I cried quietly on the bus ride home. It wasn't just business, it was proof that I was building a future entirely my own. I was no longer surviving on scraps of dignity. I was creating something lasting, something no one could take from me again. The woman who had once been discarded with 2 suitcases and a cardboard box was transforming. Each green shoot, each flower that returned from the edge of death, mirrored the life blooming inside me. I was not only recovering plants, I was recovering myself. By the 4th year, Second Bloom plant recovery was no longer a side project hidden above a pizza shop. It had become a steady business with real momentum. I rented a small warehouse on the edge of town, hired 2 part-time helpers, and built partnerships with more than a dozen garden centers across the county. What amazed me most was not just the revenue, though making more in a single season than I once earned in an entire year felt extraordinary. It was the respect. People who once dismissed me as too old or past my prime were now calling me for advice. The local newspaper ran a feature about my unusual business model, highlighting how I turned waste into profit. Soon after, I was invited to speak at a sustainability fair, standing on a stage in front of college students and business owners who scribbled notes as if every word I spoke mattered. I remember clutching the microphone, my voice shaking at first, until I saw the nods of encouragement in the crowd. When I stepped off that stage, I realized something important. My story wasn't just about plants. It was about proving that nothing and no one is ever truly beyond saving. Financially, I crossed milestones I had never dared to imagine. My annual income climbed into 6 figures, then doubled again. For the first time since my husband died, I felt not only secure but powerful. I moved from my cramped apartment into a bright townhouse with a small backyard that I filled with experimental plants. It wasn't just a home, it was a sanctuary built from resilience. Then came the day I visited Willow Heights, the wealthiest neighborhood in our town. The streets were lined with towering oaks, and the houses looked like something from a magazine. I remembered how David and Melissa used to drive through those streets on Sunday afternoons, pointing at mansions and saying, "One day." They never knew that one day would belong to me. When the real estate agent unlocked the doors of a grand white colonial with 12-foot ceilings and wide porches, I knew I had found my next chapter. It cost millions, but Second Bloom had grown enough to make it possible. I signed the papers without hesitation. Standing on the balcony of that home, I looked down at the town that once watched me leave in shame. The woman who had been pushed aside now owned the most prestigious address in the very neighborhood my son had only dreamed of. Success wasn't just measured in money or property. For me, it was the quiet knowledge that I had taken every insult, every rejection, every painful night in that motel, and turned it into fuel. I was not surviving anymore. I was thriving, and everyone could see it. News travels quickly in a small town. Within a week of signing the deed to my new home in Willow Heights, the local paper ran a short article, "Local businesswoman purchases historic estate." My name was printed in bold letters. I knew it was only a matter of time before the knock came at my door. That Saturday morning, I was still unpacking dishes when the doorbell echoed through the wide foyer. I glanced at the security monitor and froze. There they were, David, Melissa, and 2 teenagers I barely recognized as my grandchildren. Sophie, 16 now, stood with a nervous smile. Ethan, 14, shuffled his feet the same way his father used to when he was a boy. For 6 years, I had missed birthdays, graduations, and holidays. Now they stood at my doorstep, dressed neatly as if this were a planned performance. I opened the door but did not invite them in. "Well," I said, steadying my voice, "what an unexpected surprise." David cleared his throat. He looked older, his hair grayer, his shoulders not quite as straight. Melissa, however, wore her same polished expression, the one that had dismissed me years earlier. "Mom," David began, "we came to congratulate you on the house. It's beautiful." His eyes drifted past me into the marble entryway, unable to hide the hunger behind his words. Melissa smiled too brightly. "We've been thinking a lot about the past," she said. "We regret how things ended. We want to reconnect as a family." Her tone was sweet, but her eyes flickered with calculation. I had seen that look before, the look of someone who wanted something. I didn't need to guess what it was. Rumors of their financial troubles had already reached me through old friends. David had lost his job, the mortgage was behind, and Melissa's spending habits had only dug the hole deeper. I leaned against the door frame, studying the 4 of them. Sophie and Ethan avoided eye contact, shifting uncomfortably, as though they could feel the tension their parents were trying to mask. 6 years of silence, and suddenly they remembered the meaning of family just when I was standing in the house they had once only dreamed of. Their timing was perfect, and perfectly predictable. I finally stepped aside and motioned them into the living room. The sunlight streamed across the tall windows, catching the gleam of polished wood and the soft velvet of the chairs I had carefully chosen. I watched as David sat stiffly on the edge of the sofa, Melissa's eyes darting across the room, already measuring its worth. Sophie and Ethan lingered near the doorway, hesitant, unsure if they truly belonged. So I began, settling into my armchair. "What is it you really came here for?" My voice was calm but firm. David fidgeted with his hands. Melissa spoke first. "We've had some hard times. David lost his job, the bills have piled up. We thought maybe we could stay here for a while, just until things turn around." There it was. No pretense left, only need dressed up as reconciliation. I let the words hang in the air before I turned to Sophie and Ethan. "Do you know why we haven't seen each other in 6 years?" Their eyes widened. Ethan shook his head. Sophie whispered, "Dad said you moved away and didn't want to be part of our lives anymore." The lie sliced deeper than any insult. "That isn't true," I said gently. "I was told to leave. I had nowhere to go. I wanted nothing more than to stay close to you, but I was not given the choice." Their faces shifted from confusion to hurt. "Is that true?" Sophie asked her father. David's silence was louder than any confession. I reached for a small box on the side table and pulled out an old letter, his letter, the one he wrote in guilt years ago. "Your father once admitted he regretted what happened. He begged me not to tell your mother because she had threatened to leave if I returned." Melissa's face drained of color. "You kept that?" she snapped. "Of course," I replied evenly. "Some truths deserve to be remembered." The room grew heavy with silence. The children's eyes brimmed with betrayal, staring at the parents who had lied to them for years. I leaned forward. "I was thrown away once. I will never allow myself to be thrown away again. This home, this life, is not a safety net for those who only remember me when they need something." My words were steady, my resolve unshaken. For the first time in years, I felt completely in control of the story. Sophie was the first to speak, her voice trembling but clear. "Grandma, I don't remember much from when I was little, but I do remember your cookies and the way you read to us before bed. I don't understand why we lost all of that." Tears welled in her eyes. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, his face red with confusion and anger. "Why didn't you tell us the truth?" he demanded, turning to his parents. David lowered his gaze, unable to answer. Melissa crossed her arms, her lips pressed tight, as if admitting nothing would somehow erase the evidence. I took a deep breath and softened my tone for the children. "You didn't lose me. I was always here, waiting for the day you might find me again. What happened was never your fault." Their eyes met mine, filled with both relief and sorrow. For the first time in years, I felt the bond of family stir again, though it came not from my son or his wife, but from the grandchildren who had been robbed of knowing me. As the conversation wound down, Melissa stood abruptly, muttering that this was a waste of time. David followed, defeated and silent. They left without a promise to return, their footsteps echoing through the grand foyer. The door closed behind them, and the house fell quiet again. But it wasn't an empty quiet. It was a peaceful one. Sophie and Ethan remained, asking questions about their father's childhood, laughing softly when I showed them old photographs. Hours slipped by until it was time for them to leave, but before walking out, Sophie hugged me tightly. "We'll come back," she whispered. "We want you in our lives." Ethan nodded firmly beside her. When their car disappeared down the driveway, I stood at the window for a long moment. I felt no bitterness, only clarity. Being cast aside had forced me to build a life of strength, independence, and dignity. And now, I finally understood, sometimes the family you fight hardest to hold on to is the very one you must let go of in order to bloom. In the quiet that followed, I carried my coffee out to the wide back porch. The sun was rising over the hills of Willow Heights, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and pink. I thought about the years I had lost, the motel nights, the tears pressed into thin pillows, the feeling of being unwanted. Yet I also thought about what had grown from that pain, a thriving business, a beautiful home, and the strength to stand tall without apology. Life has a way of testing us in the harshest ways, stripping us down until we believe we have nothing left. But sometimes, what looks like the end is only the beginning of a second bloom. I was thrown away, yet I flourished. And that is a truth I carry with pride. To anyone listening, I want you to remember your worth is not defined by who leaves you behind. It is defined by how you choose to rise. If my story speaks to you, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment with your thoughts, tell me where you are listening from, and don't forget to like and subscribe.